Hello again. Now, I wanted to talk a bit more about frightening thoughts and all the different things that can happen in terms of mental experiences or mental symptoms, if you want to put it that way. I talked a lot about the what-if questions, but there are other areas of interest, really, from the point of view of a sufferer, such as things like phobias, obsessions, compulsions. In fact, there can be often some very confusing and upsetting mental experiences which are difficult often to put into words. And I talked about those sorts of things under the heading of unreality, because that's basically what they are, just odd experiences caused by mental fatigue and from concentrating too much on how you're feeling in yourself and how you're thinking yourself. Now, in her books, Claire Weekes talks about other specific symptoms, and there are things such as loss of confidence, indecision, suggestibility. Now, loss of confidence is easy to understand if you understand the pattern of your suffering, and you understand how you got to this state. You're inevitably going to lose confidence in your ability to do things because of the confused state of mind you're in and the fact that you're being bombarded by physical symptoms all the time. So naturally enough, all your feelings of being able to cope with whatever you have to cope with, your job, your studying, whatever, that is bound to take a knock, and that lack of confidence starts to return as soon as you start to recover, obviously. Indecision, again, is easy to understand because where you're constantly being afflicted by strong emotional reactions over the least little thing, trying to decide what to do over a specific issue can be enormously difficult because you get such confusing emotional reactions to whatever it is you're thinking when you're trying to decide. And as Claire Weekes put it, you think one way 1 minute, another way the next, and each point of view seems equally right or equally important. So again, it's a case of something that diminishes as you recover. Suggestibility is another completely understandable state, because you're very suggestible to your own frightening thoughts. They cause a strong reaction in you. So, if you hear or read about other potentially frightening things elsewhere, you're going to get the same sort of reactions to those as you do from your own thoughts. So you're very suggestible to anything that's potentially frightening. And in this sort of state, it's very, very hard to reason with these thoughts. So that covers those three states. Now, the what-if question. This can come in a variety of different forms. I mean, what-if is common enough, but you can say things like, suppose this happens, or, oh God, suppose this happens, or variations on that theme. They're all questions suggesting an unpleasant outcome of some kind, an unpleasant event. And what these kind of thoughts are very good at is picking on the things that terrify you the most. In fact, they seem to go out of their way to find more and more outrageous and often horrifying, grotesque thoughts to present to you. And clearly, the more horrific they become, the more they frighten you. That's just the nature of the way they work. That doesn't signify anything. It certainly doesn't signify anything about your state of sanity. It's got nothing to do with that at all. It's just an unwelcome habit that comes about through being in a very sensitized state. Now, sometimes you don't even necessarily hear the question, the what-if question, clearly. Sometimes it can just be a single word, a word that on its own is enough to frighten you. Like, for example, in my own case, if I thought about the stroke that I had last year, I could just think of one single word, stroke, and that will be enough to evoke all the frightening feelings. That's how I was for a time. Now, that's just examples of the way these thoughts operate. And even sometimes you don't actually hear the what-if question, but you know what it is that the subject is about, and especially if it's one that's happened to you often. Now, the content of these thoughts, like I say, can be any number of different things. They can be, like I say, they can be particularly horrific, and if they relate to your own health, for example, or for your own future, or for anything to do with your loved ones, those close to you, they always single out the most emotive issue to pick upon. So you can have what-if thoughts about virtually anything, as I say, if it evokes a response from you. And such, when you're in a very sensitized state, it takes very little to get that fear inside of you as a result of these thoughts. Now, they can be really gruesome and really horrifying, and you think the more they become that way, the more, of course, you're going to question your sanity again. You think, well, how can I possibly be thinking these awful things? There's got to be something wrong with me to be thinking these awful things. The more horrific it becomes, the more you think that way. You think, oh God, there's something seriously wrong here if I can think these thoughts. Now, the point about this is that, like I say, this is the way these thoughts operate, and it certainly has no bearing whatsoever on your state of sanity, none whatsoever. The very fact that you're horrified by these thoughts means that you recognize them for what they are. You're not, if you didn't didn't think anything of having these horrific thoughts, if you weren't concerned over them, then that will be a problem. But you are concerned over them. You're concerned that they keep on coming, and this you're never in any danger of having your sanity threatened simply by virtue of having these thoughts. None at all. Never in any danger. Now, the pattern of these thoughts tends to be in a kind of cycle. Certainly in my own experience, they have a kind of pattern to them, depending on what's happening in my life or how I'm feeling at any particular time. Like, for example, I can wake up in the morning and as soon as I wake up, I start to think about what lies ahead in the day to come. And depending on what it is, I can start to think about what I have to do, and then think about how I'm going to feel about it, how I'm going to feel while I try to do these things. And along with this come the what-if questions. Like, for example, if I have to go out or have an appointment or something like that, then the what-if question will be, well, what if my dizziness gets so bad I can't do this? What if my stomach gets really upset and I can't do this? These are the kind of questions that constantly appear when you consider what you need to do. And again, it varies so much from day to day according to what you're required to do. Now, looking at ways I've described means whereby you try and detach yourself from these thoughts. In other words, that you become an observer of the thoughts. You're not in them anymore. You're just kind of watching and listening as they occur. Now, you're just trying to separate yourself from the thoughts, because you are not these thoughts. They are just virtually an automatic process that's happening in your mind. And that's not you. This is just mechanical thoughts that go through your mind. But you can treat them in different ways. You can. There's some ideas from David Johnson's Freedom from Fear program, where he talks a lot about this kind of thing. And his suggestion is to ridicule them, to call them, say, you're a joke, you're just pathetic, you're just answering them with that sort of response, you're just stupid. Or you can humour them, like I said, yeah, of course, which leads on to another reply, is to say, so what? You're telling me this is going to happen, so what? So what? What does it matter? So you're kind of taking the taking the sting out of these thoughts by doing that. But it depends how intense the thoughts become, or how they are, and how, more to the point, how intense your emotional response is to these thoughts. And I mentioned on my last recording about how when I had desensitized, I had some of these thoughts and I was able to laugh at them because on that occasion, there was no emotional reaction to them, no frightened reaction. So I just thought, well, that's a stupid thought, and I just laughed it off because I could see clearly what they were actually, what they were. They were just silly thoughts. Now, there are other kind of habits of thought, such as obsessions or compulsions. Obsessions are when you become preoccupied with a set of ideas. I used to get like this in the past. I used to get like this over financial matters, where I used to have a kind of process where I was trying to work out what I should do. I used to find the same stupid thoughts used to keep on repeating in my mind. Oh, should I do this? Should I do that? If I do that, then I've got to do that. It was total obsession with a particular theme, if you like, a particular issue. And I used to go round and round in circles, repeating these same thoughts. And yet again, it totally depends on the physical response you get to these obsessive thoughts as to how much they occur. Compulsions work in a similar way. You feel compelled to act or carry out an act of a certain kind. You could almost call them superstitions. You feel you have to do them, or if you don't, you're going to feel terribly afraid, or something bad is going to happen if you don't act on this compulsion. And again, it's the same story. It's only the exaggerated feelings that come in association with these compulsive thoughts and actions. Claire Weeks used to mention an example of somebody who had who were obsessed over cleanliness and used to be compelled to keep washing their hands and cleaning everything. And she said, well, it wasn't the fact that the person was doing this so much as all the fear that was associated with it. That feeling that you absolutely have to do these things or something terrible is going to happen. And yet again, it's always all centers around having exaggerated emotional reactions to these thoughts, to the compulsions. I used to have a kind of, not so much a compulsion, more like a superstition, if you like, where I used to go, before I went to bed every night, I used to have a cigarette in a particular way. I used to go go upstairs into my bathroom, open the window, and have a cigarette with my head poking out the window, which sounds stupid and ridiculous, but I felt I had to do that every night for the reasons I just mentioned. I felt if I didn't do it, something else bad was going to happen. But as time has gone on, I just realised what I was doing. I realised the silliness of it, and I stopped doing it. And that's just a very trivial example of the kind of compulsions you can have to do things. Even people, obviously, that are not nervously ill or not sensitized have superstitions that they have to do a certain thing, otherwise, they're going to invite bad luck upon themselves. Now, all this type of mental processing, all this thought activity, constant, repetitious, non-stop thinking, clearly has a very draining effect, and after weeks and months or even years of this kind of thing, your mind becomes so very, very tired. And when it gets that tired, all the worst kind of thoughts seem to stick in your mind. They keep coming again and again. You seem to lose mental resilience. You can't do anything with these thoughts. You can't reason with them. You can't stop them coming. And this is often where being in this state can lead into a state of depression, because the thoughts that you're getting are so gloomy and so hopeless, and they can center in not just any immediate problems you might have, but around your state of health and about your future, because everything seems so hopeless. So naturally enough, that coupled with all the exhaustion accompanying your suffering, your anxiety suffering, that's bound to make you feel depressed. Now, Claire Weeks used to describe this kind of depression as depletion, insofar as it was more a physical condition. She used to see it as, basically your body, your batteries are flat. She used to put it like that. Your batteries are run down where you've been draining your batteries for so long. And it's a physical condition, and calling it depletion meant that you could think of it in a more positive way. Like she said, depression is such a depressing word, which it is. Depletion, on the other hand, it's got a more hopeful sound to it, and it implies that it's possible to replete yourself. Now, I can attest to that, because the first time I was ill, and I reached rock bottom in terms of exhaustion, and mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion, and it took me surprisingly a short time to actually, once I stopped fighting my condition and I started to use her method, I found that my strength and my energy and my interest began to return by themselves. And I was able to do this in weeks. I'm not saying that's the case with everybody, but in my own case, I certainly saw it return by itself. I didn't have to do anything specifically, other than, like I say, not fight the state I was in. So that's just basic. That's the most common type of depression that accompanies anxiety, and I'm going to talk about other types of depression on a separate video. But it is extremely common to have this kind of depression. Simply, it's despair, really. It's hopelessness, because you haven't got an answer, and you've been asking yourself questions and questions for weeks, months, even years, and you've just got no answer as to what to do. But when you start to use these techniques, and you start to allow your body, give your body a chance to recover from the state you've put it into, then this kind of depression starts to lift by itself. And when you really see this method start to work, not just on the way you feel physically, but on your thought processes too, then at long last a bit of hope comes into the picture, and you start to feel slightly more positive about getting to, being able to recover from this, which indeed you can. So that is that's talking a little bit more, like I say, about the other types of thought. Now, phobias are still frightening thoughts, but phobias, as you know, most likely know, relate to some specific item an object or a thing or an event or a situation. Something that evokes very strong feelings of fear in you. Now, I've talked about my own particular phobia, which is fear of vomiting. And I've had that all my life, really. And the reasons why I've had it all my life are kind of lost in the mist of time. I'm not sure it really matters at this stage, after all these years, why it came about in the first place. And I don't think it's essential to cure it to find that out. And it's often thought that, to be able to cure people of phobias, it's always thought necessary to find out how the phobia came about in the first place. And well, maybe it works in some cases, maybe not, I don't know. But I do know, in my own case, I've not found a definitive answer to dealing with this phobia. But what I will say is this: there are two types of people really that suffer from phobias. There are the ones that are not sensitized, and they may have phobias about a specific thing. Like, for example, so many people are frightened of spiders. Now, if they're in a situation where a spider is there, then they might suffer, extreme anxiety. My wife is like that over spiders. But the rest of the time, when there's not spiders in the vicinity, then, their nervous reactions are normal. On the other hand, there's people that are sensitized, and they may have, most people have some sort of hidden fear that's in the background. When they're not sensitized, these fears kind of stay in the background for the most part, unless they're subject to the thing that they're frightened of. Whereas when they become sensitized, these fears, as along with all the other fears, become magnified, exaggerated. So if you have a phobia already, or you develop a phobia while sensitized, which is all too easily done, again because of the exaggerated fear feelings you're getting, then you're clearly at a disadvantage, because this particular fear comes very strongly, and this is certainly true in my own case with my fear of vomiting. Now, there's one book I've read on the subject of phobias, which is a very interesting read, and it's by a chap called Dr. Howard Liebgold, and the book is called Freedom from Fear. And he discovered a therapy for people suffering from phobias, and he used it on himself because he had particular phobias that had ruled his life for many years. And it's in my own case, with my own particular phobia, what he suggests you do is to pretend that you're vomiting, make all the noises that you would make if you were vomiting. It's a kind of a graduated exposure to the thing feared, which is a method used for people suffering from phobias. Graduated exposure, so that bit by bit you come to accept. There's that word again. You come to accept your fears. You accept that the thing that you're so scared of is actually not something you need to be scared of at all. So he used that idea, but I never managed to do what he says in terms of my own phobia. But it's certainly a very interesting read, and if you suffer from phobias, then I would recommend that book, Freedom from Fear, Dr. Howard Liebgold, Liebgold. Now, phobias, like I say, when you're sensitized, it can indeed be particularly troublesome, and I found with this one I've got that in my worst states of sensitization, virtually anything can seem a potential threat in terms of bringing about the vomiting I'm so scared of. So, for example, I can have diarrhea or something, and by implication that might be associated with vomiting. I might have a flu-type virus. Again, some people suffer vomiting with those types of infection. But sometimes the connection can be so tenuous. It's the sensitivity to fear reactions that's the problem here. The connections can be very vague, so there's always, with me, this constant attention on my stomach, what it's doing and what it's, how it's feeling. And this is particularly true when I wake in the morning, because if sometimes I wake up with a kind of, not exactly nauseous stomach, but a kind of squeamish feeling in my stomach, which is not in itself that bad, but by association I think, oh God, what does this mean? As time has gone on and I've learned how to accept frightening thoughts in general, then I'm learning more to be able to accept those sorts of thoughts associated with my phobia. So, as time has gone on, I've learned not to be impressed by these thoughts, and I've begun to see them as they are, just like any other scary what-if thought. They're just stupid, nonsensical thoughts. So that in itself there's no real distinction between regular frightening thoughts and phobic thoughts. It's all the same result. They all give you a fear reaction, and if you're sensitized, a strong and frequent fear reaction. So that's how it's been in my life. And alongside that particular phobia, I have had a kind of health phobia, pretty much throughout my adult life, certainly. And again, it's the same thing. If I suspect there's something physically going on with me, then I start to worry about it, and I start to have what-if thoughts about it. Now, when I suffered my stroke, I was very, very frightened on that occasion. But after, when I realised what was happening, when I was told what had happened to me, then the fear had kind of died away, because I lost my fear of it. It was initially it was very frightening, because it was such there was so much uncertainty, so many unknowns there, but like I say, once I understood what had happened, I was able to accept it. So really, there's no clear distinction between ordinary frightening thoughts and phobias. They all basically amount to the same thing in terms of how you react to them. Now, obviously, this all requires a lot of practice, and I've been in touch with people, and I've read accounts of people who find dealing with the frightening thoughts far more difficult than dealing with the physical reactions. And that I can understand, because these types of thought are so relentless and take so little to trigger them, so little, even little minor things. But it's like I say, you have to learn how to let them be there, not to try and stop them. It's not to say that you don't, if you find some means of what's called natural distraction, that's what David Johnson in his Freedom and Fear program called it, natural distraction, something that interests you, something that you enjoy doing. If you find something like that to do, and it helps remove your thinking, or turn your attention somewhere else apart from your thinking, then so much the better. But you're not trying to do this in a forceful way. You're not trying to force your mind onto something else in order to avoid having these thoughts. That's not going to work, because you're just increasing the tension. You're just making things harder for yourself. Now, you may find that at times that does happen anyway. You just become absorbed in something you're doing, and during that time your mind is focused elsewhere, so it actually gives your mind a chance to rest. It gives your nervous system a chance to rest as well. So it's so important, Clairweeks always stress the importance of having some form of occupation, something that's within your capabilities of how you are at the time, not something that's going to overtax you, overstretch you, but something that's easy enough to do and something that gives your mind something else to think about. Like I said, that this is not fighting the frightening thoughts, not at all. It's just giving your mind another purpose, if you like, put it that way. And I think we each have at least one thing that, before we became in this state, one thing we really enjoyed doing above all else. So that's quite a bit of information about this process, and inevitably you're going to look at your own particular case and look at the way your thinking patterns are, and you're going to be filled with doubts over whether or not this can actually work for you, because there are always so many doubts in your mind. When you're in that frightened, sensitized state, there's always doubt. There's always doubtful questions popping up in your mind. You're very hard to convince of anything because your emotions are so all over the place. Your fearful reactions happen at the slightest little thing. So this is where you need always to keep repeating things. This is why I do this a lot in these recordings. I repeat things a lot because I know how difficult it is to take information in, and you need to hear the key facts many times, and gradually it will start to sink in. So I think that's all I need to say at this stage about the thought process. Is if there's particular things you're interested in finding out about, if you want to ask me questions about, obviously I speak largely from my own experience of these things, but obviously there's plenty of other situations which you may be experiencing yourself, and if you want to ask me questions about it, please do. I'll be happy to help. But the main thing is that you're aiming to, like I said before, you're aiming to desensitize your body, desensitize your nervous system. And when you do this, you'll find that this ridiculous thought processes that are going on in your mind all the time, they start to go away by themselves. You don't have to make them go away. They just start to fade all by themselves. And that happened to me. I know and I remember what that was like. As my body calmed down, as my nervous system calmed down, so did all the scary thoughts. I didn't have to make anything happen. It just happened by itself. So this is why you need to practice this method. And you're not going to get it right the first time. You're going to need to do it a number of times. And maybe looking back at what I've said over these two videos about your thought processes, you may think, well, it's not a very impressive kind of treatment. You had maybe hoped for something a bit quicker, something a bit to spare you any more of this awful type of thinking. You want something that acts a bit more quickly. Well, I have thought that many times. During my darkest times, I wanted it all gone, just now. I mean, that is all part of the condition. Wanting things gone now. It's just you can't tolerate another minute of it. You can't tolerate any more scariness in your thoughts. You just want it gone. But that's all part of the same pattern of thought. Having those thoughts is all part of it. But like I say, this might not be anything that seems as if it will work. But it's not about ignoring how you feel. It's about accepting how you feel. It's something that will allow your body to calm down and allow your thoughts to just quieten down. So, anyway, that's enough rambling from me. Like I said, I will talk a bit about depression on a separate video, because there are other types of depression. I can give you again examples from my own experience which will describe those, but there's depression with anxiety is very, very common indeed. So please, whatever you're thinking now, it's not always going to be like this. And however convincing these thoughts may seem to you, like I said, treat them all in the same way. Treat them all with contempt, because they're telling you no truth. They're telling you nothing that you need to know. Nothing. Anyway, thank you as ever for watching and listening, and like I say, ask me questions if you would like to. I'd be welcome to help you. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you on the next recording.